The Indiana Fever won the Commissioner's Cup. It was the biggest win in franchise history. At the center of this season has been Caitlin Clark, a player who had already helped them win. That part got skipped. She wasn't on the court that night. That single absence became the headline. What happened next is where the story actually starts. This game created an argument that won't go away, and the reaction to it says more than the win itself. 1. The moment everything flipped. In the weeks before the Commissioner's Cup final, Caitlin Clark was already one of the most discussed players in the league. Indiana's results were increasingly evaluated through her performances. When the Fever lost, attention centered on her shot selection, turnovers, and efficiency. When they won, the focus shifted away from her. During that stretch, comments from Diana Taurasi, a WNBA veteran and one of the most accomplished players in league history, resurfaced. Her remark, "Reality is coming," was used by critics to argue that Clark's early impact was being overstated. Shortly before the final, Clark suffered an injury during regular play. It was not considered long-term, but it ruled her out of the Commissioner's Cup game. With her unavailable, the Fever entered the final without their primary ball handler and offensive focal point. At that point, the conversation around the Fever narrowed. Instead of focusing on matchups or execution, discussion centered on whether the team could compete without Clark. Expectations dropped quickly, and the outcome was treated as predictable before the game was played. The Fever entered the Commissioner's Cup final as 10.5-point underdogs on the road against the top team in the league. Clark was inactive, dressed on the bench, and not part of the rotation. Indiana stayed composed, matched the moment, and closed the game late. When the final buzzer sounded, the Fever had won the Commissioner's Cup, the first in franchise history, without Caitlin Clark playing a single minute. That win shifted the discussion immediately. Instead of focusing on execution or matchup factors, some critics treated the result as a statement about Clark herself. To see why that conclusion does not hold up, you have to look at how the narrative was formed before the opening tip. 2. The hate against Caitlin Clark. Once Caitlin Clark was ruled out with an injury, the reaction was immediate. Social media attention shifted away from the Fever's situation and toward Clark herself. Rival fan bases treated her absence as confirmation of earlier criticism. During that stretch, every Fever loss became part of the same argument, while strong performances from other rookies were framed as evidence that Clark had been overrated. Media coverage followed a similar pattern. Discussions repeatedly returned to the same question of whether Indiana could function without her. Instead of treating the injury as a temporary absence, it became a referendum on Clark's impact and value. Another moment added to the tension. Despite leading the league in television ratings, attendance, and overall engagement, Clark finished 9th among guards in All-Star voting by her fellow players. The results stood out, not because of where she ranked, but because of what it suggested. It fueled debate about resentment, perception, and how influence is measured inside the league. At that point, the criticism was no longer coming from just one place. Fans, media, and parts of the league itself were contributing to the same atmosphere, which is why what followed mattered. With the noise at its loudest and expectations at their lowest, Indiana responded in a way few were prepared for. 3. The night everything changed. The Indiana Fever entered the 2025 Commissioner's Cup final with expectations already set against them. Caitlin Clark was out. Most outside observers treated the outcome as decided before tip-off. The focus was not on how Indiana might compete, but on how quickly the game would get away from them. Early on, the Minnesota Lynx, the top team in the WNBA, looked in control. They built a lead and appeared to be following the script many expected. But Indiana did not unravel. Instead, they responded with a sustained run that flipped the game entirely. The Fever went on an 18-0 stretch, holding Minnesota scoreless for more than 8 minutes and forcing the momentum sharply in the other direction. The shift was immediate. The crowd quieted. The pace slowed. What had looked like a formality turned into a contested game. By halftime, Indiana had erased a 13-point deficit and taken a 32-27 lead, putting the pressure squarely on Minnesota. 4. How Indiana won without Caitlin. Indiana's control of the game started on defense. The Minnesota Lynx, one of the most efficient offenses in the league, were held to 7 points in the second quarter and went more than 8 minutes without a field goal, their longest scoreless stretch since 2011. Indiana disrupted spacing, contested shots, and consistently forced Minnesota into late clock decisions. On offense, the load was shared. Natasha Howard set the tone with 16 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists, establishing a physical presence early and maintaining it throughout the game. Aliyah Boston operated as the offensive hub, finishing with 12 points, 11 rebounds, and 6 assists, repeatedly creating clean looks for her teammates. The guard rotation filled the remaining gaps. Kelsey Mitchell provided steady scoring, while Ari McDonald and Sophie Cunningham applied constant pressure on both ends of the floor. Without Caitlin Clark in the lineup, Indiana's guards combined for 46 points, preventing Minnesota from locking in on any single option. By the final buzzer, the result was clear. Indiana did not simply withstand the moment, they dictated it. And once you understand how the Fever won this game, it becomes easier to understand why the reaction afterward shifted so quickly. 5. Why this win changed the narrative. The Commissioner's Cup final did not just produce an upset, it challenged the most common storylines surrounding the Fever. For months, Indiana had been described as a team entirely dependent on Caitlin Clark. Without her, the assumption was that the structure would collapse. The win complicated that view. Indiana showed it could execute, defend, and close a high-level game without relying on a single player. The roster moves and internal development that had been overlooked were suddenly visible. This was not a one-player operation. It was a functional team. That is what made the result uncomfortable for critics. If Indiana could win a major game without Clark, then her return no longer represented a fix. It represented an upgrade. The conversation shifted from whether the Fever could survive to how high their ceiling might actually be. 6. Caitlin's role in getting them there. That shift only makes sense if one detail is kept intact. Indiana did not reach the Commissioner's Cup final without Caitlin Clark. In the semifinal against New York, Clark delivered one of the defining performances of the Fever's season. She scored 32 points, eliminated the previously undefeated Liberty, and directly pushed Indiana into the final. The impact went beyond scoring. She controlled tempo, forced defensive adjustments, and consistently created advantages that carried through the game. The same pattern held against Connecticut. In close stretches, Clark stabilized the offense. She drew coverage, opened space for teammates, and made the plays that kept Indiana composed late. Her influence shaped matchups and rotations even when it did not show cleanly in the box score. That context matters. Removing Clark from the final does not erase the work that put Indiana there. It only shortens the memory of how the team arrived. 7. The reaction after the win. Once the final buzzer sounded, the reaction followed a familiar pattern. Instead of focusing on how Indiana won, attention shifted to why the win should be discounted. Some argued the Commissioner's Cup was not meaningful. Others claimed Indiana benefited from Clark not playing, as if her absence lowered the standard of competition. The contrast was noticeable. Around the league, players have routinely been credited for team success, even when sidelined for a final game. In this case, Clark's earlier impact was treated differently. Her contributions were minimized, while the result itself was reframed to support pre-existing opinions. That response revealed the underlying tension. The win disrupted a simple narrative, and the adjustment was uncomfortable. Indiana had just made history. Caitlin Clark had helped get them there. Both facts existed at the same time, and that reality is what reshaped the Fever's season moving forward. 8. Why this win changes the Fever's season. The Commissioner's Cup victory changed Indiana's season in practical ways. First, it eased internal pressure. For weeks, the team had been evaluated almost entirely through Caitlin Clark's availability. Winning a high-level game without her confirmed that the Fever could function, execute, and close without being dependent on one player. It also allowed Indiana to manage Clark's recovery more carefully. With no immediate urgency to rush her back, the team could prioritize long-term health over short-term optics. By setting expectations early and ruling her out in advance, the Fever reduced unnecessary pressure and lowered the risk of re-injury. The win also clarified roles. Ari McDonald established herself as a defensive guard who could handle tempo, while other players settled into more defined responsibilities. When Clark returns, she does not have to carry every possession. Indiana enters the next phase of the season deeper, more balanced, and better prepared than before. 9. Caitlin's post-game comments. After the game, Caitlin Clark addressed the reaction from the sideline. Her comments drew attention not because of where she was standing, but because they acknowledged the tension surrounding her presence in the league. She referenced the criticism directly, noting how quickly narratives shift depending on outcomes. Clark also pointed out a structural reality. The Commissioner's Cup payout exceeded that of the wnba championship, highlighting broader issues around compensation and visibility. The comment resonated because it connected the moment to a larger conversation that has followed her throughout the season. Even without playing, Clark remained central to the discussion. Her remarks reinforced that her influence is not limited to box scores or minutes played. It extends into how games are framed, discussed, and remembered. 10. What this means going forward. The Commissioner's Cup did not settle every question, but it changed the range of possibilities. Indiana showed it could win in different circumstances, with different lineups and under pressure. That flexibility matters over a long season. When Clark returns at full health, she does not rejoin a fragile roster. She joins a team that has already proven it can hold its ground. For opponents, that raises the level of preparation required. Indiana is no longer easy to categorize or dismiss. The Fever did not just win a trophy. They altered how their season is viewed and how their future is projected. The Commissioner's Cup marked a turning point. Indiana made history, and the reaction to it revealed just as much as the result itself. With Caitlin Clark returning to a team that has already proven its depth, the Fever's season now moves forward under very different expectations. Where do you think this version of Indiana goes from here? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more coverage as the Fever's season continues.